A life in the gray house. The early years of my life, I say early years because the word childhood no longer seems to roll off my tongue, were spent in a gray house in the middle of nowhere, Oregon. I lived there between the ages of 12 and 15, and our move had a logical explanation. The house was good, the area was considered decent, it was affordable for my parents, and most importantly, it was quiet and tranquil. At the time, it seemed like a good choice, but they made a fateful mistake that they would undoubtedly regret for the rest of their lives. The problem was this: I had no neighbors, not a single child to be friends with, and rarely was there anything interesting happening around. It's hard for me to recall the minor details because of how long ago it was, but whether for better or worse, people tend to remember the most traumatic and painful experiences most vividly. The dark days begin. Everything that happened, what I call the dark days, started when I was 15 and decided to be brave and explore the forest path right next to the house. I still remember looking at the path, then immediately glancing back at the red front door to make sure my parents weren't watching, before venturing into the woods. I walked to the edge, stopped at the tangle of roots, and gazed into the dark, lifeless soul of the elms before moving on. When determination welled up inside me, I started running down the rugged path, tearing through the forest. The whole time it felt like I was plunging through a stream of cold air. It was like that sharp blast of cold you get when you step into a room with the air conditioning on. An ominous fog hovered above the ground, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I slowed to a jog, then a walk, and finally stopped. I was lost. The thick fog made it impossible to see much, and it felt like something was closing in on me, pursuing, frightening. I panicked, and to calm down, frantically started looking for footprints. I remember the relief of finding them. I was close to crying. I followed them until the fog began to clear and I could find my way out. The encounter and the unease. When I reached the tree line, I finally saw daylight again. But then I realized something was wrong. Looking around, my house was nowhere to be found. Instead, I saw another house, which must have been very old because it was falling apart. The roof was almost bare. The front door was wide open and the paint was peeling off the walls. I walked around, thinking I must have taken a wrong turn, but I saw nothing familiar, not even our home. The only thing I could think of at that moment was, what if the footprints I followed weren't mine? And if not mine, whose were they? I couldn't believe what was happening. I considered going back into the forest, but couldn't bring myself to go through it again, so I decided to follow the dirt road. 45 minutes later, I finally saw our house and ran the rest of the way home. How could I have gone that far through the forest? It felt like it happened so fast. I decided to be happy I was safe at home instead of dwelling on what had occurred. I went inside. As usual, my parents asked where I'd been. I said I went for a walk. After dinner, I went to my computer to surf the internet and listen to music. But the internet in that house was terrible, though given the location, it was understandable. While I was online, the computer would randomly shut off and turn back on. It was strange. Sometimes the screen would also flash unusual colors, turn negative, or randomly switch between black and red. I got tired of it and went to bed, leaving the music on. The Black Cross. In the middle of the night, I suddenly woke up in a cold sweat, in pitch blackness. The music was playing faintly in the background, like a surrounding white noise. I got up and turned the music up a bit, and then heard something weird outside. I wiped the thick condensation off my window and looked toward the tree line. All I saw were the trees swaying in the wind, making the hollow noise of 1,000 dead symphonies, but nothing else notable. I closed the window, got back into bed, and tried to sleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was the same feeling I'd experienced in the forest that day. I pulled the covers over my head, shutting out the world, and finally drifted off. I woke up to the sound of feet running across the hardwood floors. Suddenly my door swung open, and Mom, with the most horrified look on her face, said, "Get up! You have to see this!" As you can imagine, I was very confused by the sudden change of pace. I slipped on my pajama bottoms and ran downstairs to where my parents were standing. They were both staring intently at the front door from outside, and that made me curious to see what it was. I went out the side door and walked around to see a huge black X painted on the red door. It was still slightly wet, and the paint was dripping a little. My parents looked at me sternly and asked if I'd seen anyone around the house lately. I hadn't, of course, so I said no. Dad called the nearest painter to get the door covered. He arrived relatively quickly. He was there in half an hour and gone in another half an hour. The door was repainted white. I guess it was a good change because the red color had never really matched the house before, so I didn't worry about it. I went back inside and played video games for the rest of the day since I had nothing else to do. The night visitor. I wasn't going to return to the forest, but the thought kept resonating in my mind. What happened to that house I saw? Who lived there? Why didn't I know it was there the 4 years I lived here? I wanted answers, but it was too far, and honestly, I was scared of it for some reason. I went to bed that night thinking of the forest and the house because I was strangely intrigued. After all, what else was there to do around here? It wasn't much of a shock that I woke up around 3 a.m. again and couldn't go back to sleep. This time my music was off, and the only audible noises were the piercing cries of the woods. They seemed louder than ever, and despite my best efforts, my ears couldn't shut out their noise. I got up, looked outside, and saw a big windstorm knocking down the dead and decayed trees, leaving the strongest ones to make their hollow, whistling cries. I got that feeling of being watched again. I scanned the tree line, and my eyes were drawn to the very edge of the trees near my house, where I saw someone staring up at my window, looking right into my eyes. I looked closer and saw it was a young girl with black hair, wearing a small white dress with blue eyes that seemed to glow in the moonlight. She was just standing there, completely unaffected by the wind. I sprinted downstairs, threw the door open, and ran outside toward where I saw her, but she wasn't there. I checked all edges of the tree line and saw her again. She stood there staring at me, and when I started to walk awkwardly towards her, she turned and ran into the forest. Lorna's trap. Stupidly, I decided to chase her. The forest was much darker than I expected, and even scarier than before. But I wanted answers, and she was just too suspicious. She ran through the trees so fast it was hard for me to catch her, and the way she treaded the path made it seem like she knew it very well. She weaved between the elms and dodged branches that slowed me down, making it even harder to catch her. Behind me, I could hear trees falling, but that couldn't stop me. I then tripped over a large tree branch. Before I could get to my feet, we were at the clearing. I looked toward the middle and saw the girl walking to the old house, which was eerily illuminated by the moonlight. Before she got there, she turned around and softly said, "Lorne, I have something to show you." Her voice was very frail, and it seemed to echo and resonate throughout the entire forest. "How do you know my name?" I yelled, but of course she didn't answer. I knew I shouldn't have gone this far, but something about her made me curious about what she was doing here. She led me into the house. There was a really strange feeling about it, like there was something else there, or she had been watching me again. I walked around the creaky old house, searching for a clue as to where the girl went, and I could still remember how odd the air felt. It was freezing, yet room temperature at the same time. I was sweating but had goosebumps and was shivering. There were old, ragged child's dolls scattered on the floor, and a small book in the middle of it. I picked it up just as I caught sight of the girl walking downstairs toward the basement. I ran after her, but as I stepped down the stairs, all I remembered was falling through, and then everything fading to black. The horrible truth. I woke up to daylight the next morning in the middle of the field, still with the little black book in my hands, but with no recollection of what had happened. I got up, still dazed and confused, and looked around to see that the field was completely empty. Even the house was gone. Despite my confusion, I was more scared and decided to head back home the way I went before.
I eventually got back to the house and felt so relieved, until I saw it. I walked to the front and saw that the new white door was painted red again. I went inside and walked upstairs to ask my parents if they had already repainted it, but they were just as confused as I was. They also asked me where I'd been, and I told them I must have been sleepwalking because I woke up outside. While they went to investigate the door, I went to the bathroom to take a shower. When I took my shirt off in the bathroom, I noticed it was mostly covered in a dark red substance. I thought it was blood. I felt that it was still wet, but it was definitely paint. I quickly looked in the mirror to see that there was paint on my face as well. I had so many questions. I broke down a little on the bathroom floor and cried. I quickly regained my composure and decided to pretend nothing had happened, that the day before would just wash away like the water in the shower. For the rest of the day, I sat on my bed trying to contemplate what had happened the night before, but then I remembered the book. I frantically searched my room and found it in the back pocket of my jeans. I opened it to the first page, and there was a name written in black ink. As far as I could tell, it said Lorna Burkhart. I found a strange familiarity in our similar names. I flipped through the pages, and there was nothing but random letters and scribbles. Some pages had random words and pictures, but there was nothing I could make sense of until the last page. The last page had a drawing of a red door with a giant black X painted on it, and underneath the picture there was writing. He came to my house last night. I'm next, and it's too late to stop him. I dropped the book on the floor in a state of shock, sat back on my bed and thought about everything that had happened. Was that house even real? I decided I would go ask my parents about it to see if I was going crazy or not. I walked to the front door to find them outside and came out with it. I asked, "Are there any other houses or clearings near here?" They looked at me quizzically before telling me that there weren't. At this point, I realized I must have been going crazy because there's no way I just imagined this place. Then I decided to walk all the way around the forest to look for the clearing. But to my dismay, after walking for an hour and a half, there was not one clearing. Nothing. I got back home by nighttime and just sat in my room for the rest of the night, pondering the possibilities of what had happened. I couldn't think of anything reasonably possible other than that I was going insane. I went to sleep that night knowing that I would surely wake up in the middle of the night to something strange happening, and I was scared of what or who might come. The Chronicles of Woe. To my surprise, I woke up, and from what I could recall, I didn't wake up at all in between. I was ecstatic because I felt like it was over and I was okay. Nothing happened. I looked outside my bedroom window and there was nothing unusual. I went on my computer to see what time it was, figuring it was morning, but it was 6 p.m. Now the confusion returned. How is it that I slept all day? Something's wrong here. I walked around the house, but I couldn't find my parents anywhere. So I went outside to look for them. I ran to the backyard where I used to play soccer, the side of the house, then the front to see something unnervingly familiar. Once again, the black X was painted on the red door, and I couldn't help but feel that it was why my parents weren't home. That and the fact that their car was still in the driveway. I lost all hope as to where my loved ones were, and so I decided to walk through the forest. For once, I wasn't scared. I felt strangely desensitized and emotionless as I walked through the ominously dense forest. I knew I was being watched, but I wasn't scared at all. I walked for a while and was shocked to see the house in the middle of the field again. But it wasn't in a field anymore. It was the middle of the forest. I froze for a second, but I ran to it as soon as I snapped out of it. It was like I was drawn to it for some reason, and I couldn't stay away. When I approached the house, something was different about it. The door wasn't red anymore, and a giant tree was growing right through the middle of the house, going up through the roof. I walked to the porch and started to remember that night, me falling through the stairs and getting knocked unconscious, walking back home and painting the door red, walking back to the field where I would fall asleep. I went to step inside, But before I could, she came out and reached for my hand. She looked every bit as creepy as that first night, her eyes sunken into her skull, and she was completely pale. I hesitantly grabbed her hand. She told me her name was Lorna, and that she had something for me again. She led me up the stairs to an attic with a big stained glass window, and walked over to the closet. I got nervous for the first time since the night before when she went to open it, and it was for good reason, I know now. After she opened the door, my mom and dad spilled out of the stained wood piece by piece, and I immediately had flashes of waking up in the middle of the night. I remembered waking up, grabbing the fire axe, and slowly walking into my parents' room when they were sleeping. I must have been sleeping too, because I don't remember it, but I was too quick. They didn't hear me coming. But before I knew it, they were screaming helplessly as I buried the sharp axe into their delicate throats.
Blood sprayed everywhere, on the bed, the ceiling, my clothes. Blood pooled around their bodies as I cut them into pieces. I clearly remembered the terror in their eyes as I dug the axe into their soaking wet flesh and cut through hard bones until the terror was gone when their bodies went limp with lifelessness. I distinctly remember folding up the blanket with them in it and bringing it through the forest during the massive windstorm. I could feel the blood dripping through the blankets, and the trees reached towards me as if they were congratulating me, helping me carry out this dreadful yet beautiful task. And as the wind blew through the woods, it felt like they were cheering with their eerily familiar cry. This time I knew it was for me. I brought them back into the abandoned house, where their final resting place would be, and then went back to paint the X on the door. I remember the night in the field when I was unconscious. There were people whispering to me. They were whispering to tell me to do things I had no intention of doing, but I knew that I had to. I'm sitting there staring at my parents' bodies, still dripping red with blood, and I don't feel a single thing. I asked her why she made me do it, and she said, "I didn't. You did it on your own." And that's when I thought about the diary. I asked her if her name was Lorna, and she said yes. I asked what she meant in her diary, why the last page said she was next, and that she was too late. But she didn't say anything. She got up and spoke finally. "Now it's time for me to go." And I sat over beside my parents and just looked at them. I sat beside their decaying, foul guts, and I felt no emotion. I knew this wasn't over, but when I walked outside the house to look for Lorna, she was gone without a trace. And the only sign of life, or death, rather, was a trail of my parents' blood leading to the house from the wretched path that brought me here. Now I sit here beside the decaying, bloody remains of dismembered people that I used to love. And as I scrawl out these words onto the tattered pages of the tiny black diary that Lorna left with me, I know why I'm here. These are the chronicles of woe, and this is my story. Everything that I did was for a reason. I was next, and I couldn't stop what happened. She led me into her trap, and she cursed me in the forest. I'm stuck here now, and I can't leave. I'll find a way to destroy the curse, and I'll protect these woods until I can be set free. You see, as the water of life drops from the dead branches of time, and as it shatters to dust on the ground, I realize I must wait forever for these flowers to bloom. I've waited for years for her to come back, but she's gone, and so is everything I loved. She took them away from me for her own desires, but now I must wait for the flowers to consume the dead. But the flowers will never bloom, for they were cursed by the one that brought me here. In these woods, night swallows the sun, and all life has faded away now that I'm locked away in the heart of them. Once you're here, you can never leave.